Today I'm showing you how to easily recover an old lampshade using the fabric of your choice, a glue gun, some craft glue, and of course an old lampshade. You can make any lampshade match your personal style by covering it with your favorite fabric. This was my first try at recovering a lampshade, and I promise you it was super easy and I think it turned out great. If you're new to my channel, hi, my name is Amy and my channel is Creatively Expressive. Here on my channel I share DIYs, thrift flips, budget decor, and all things creative. If you're new here, I would love it if you would become a part of my creative family by clicking that subscribe button below my video. Now without any further ado, let's get started. I'm going to be starting with this lampshade that I found at Goodwill for $2.49. I like the shape of it, but it's all stained up and not quite the color I wanted. I'm going to start by removing the bias tape trim from the lampshade. And I am going to save these to use as a template for my new lampshade. Now that I have all the trim removed, I can see that the original cover is broken into 4 panels. Each fabric panel covers one big and one small section of the frame. It also has an inner fabric lining and an outside cover. I wanted to be able to keep that inner lining attached to the frame. But then I realized that the inner lining is overlapping that outer cover. At first I thought I was going to have to remove the inner lining from the frame as well, but then my husband suggested that I just cut the outer lining off of the frame instead of pulling it off. And I was like, oh duh! So now I'm going to take an X-Acto knife and carefully cut the outer fabric right along the top edges of the frame. And I am being very careful not to cut through the inner lining as well. I found the easiest way to do this was to face the blade of the X-Acto knife out towards me and away from the inside as I am cutting. Once I have cut along both of the edges, I can just lift the outer cover off the lampshade. And the inner lining is still intact. There are a couple of spots on the inner lining that are loose, so I'm just going to hot glue those spots back down to the frame. Now to clean up the inner lining, I am going to spray it with some Dawn Power Wash and then rinse it off outside with the hose. Then I'm going to leave it outside in the shade to dry. And since it's summer, it didn't take very long at all to fully dry. While that is drying, I'm going to work on the new lampshade cover. And I'm going to use the original cover as my template. The original cover is 4 panels sewn together, and I'm going to cut them apart by cutting the stitching away. Now I'm just making sure that each panel is the same size, and they are, so I'm just going to use one of them as a cut template. I found this pre-cut fabric that I liked for this shade at Walmart. It's 2 yards, and when I am finished with this shade, I will still have a bunch of this fabric left over. I took my new template piece and I laid it down on the back side of my new fabric and I traced around it, giving myself about an inch border around the entire template. And I am using a water erasable pen to do this. I cut out the traced piece and then I make sure that it fits on the frame. And I made it bigger on purpose to give myself some wiggle room when applying it to the frame. So now that I know that the piece is going to work, I'm going to trace it 3 more times onto my fabric and then cut out those 3 other pieces. Now I'm using my hot glue gun set to the high temperature to glue the first panel onto the frame. I start by gluing that top edge, leaving some fabric overhang at the top of the frame. Now I'm going to start gluing down the sides. Each of the fabric panels covers 3 bars on the frame. But when I apply the hot glue, I am only applying it to the 2 outer bars, skipping the middle one. Then when I am sticking the fabric down, I am pulling the fabric taut as I am sticking it down. That way my fabric is nice and tight and has no wrinkles in it. With my first panel, it took me a little practice and I had to pull the fabric up and re-glue it a couple of times. But after the first panel, I got the hang of it, and the other 3 panels were a lot easier for me to do. Once I have the sides glued down, I am going to glue the fabric down along the bottom edge of the frame. And again, I am pulling the fabric taut as I am sticking it down. Now that I have the fabric panel glued on, I am going to cut away the excess fabric. The second panel I am going to glue on is the one directly across from the first one. And I am going to glue it on the same way I did the first one, starting at the top, pulling the fabric in opposite directions as I stick it down. Then doing the sides, pulling the fabric taut as I go. Then the bottom, again pulling on the fabric as I am gluing it down. Then I will cut away the excess fabric on the second panel and then glue on the last two panels, repeating the same steps as I did on the first two. Now the lampshade is covered in the new fabric and I think it's looking pretty good. But we gotta cover up the rough edges on the fabric panels. Remember how I saved the bias trim from the original lampshade? Well, now we are going to use those as a template for the new trim. I am taking a piece of fabric that is a little longer than the trim piece and I am folding over one edge and ironing along that folded edge. I'm using a small heat press, but you can also just use a regular iron if you don't have one. Then I cut the folded piece away from the rest of the fabric. Now I am folding over the fabric again, making the edge hit the center of my fabric. And then I did the same thing on the other side, making the two folded edges meet up in the middle. But after doing this, I realized this is not what I wanted to do for these pieces. So then I remake my trim piece by folding over the edge about 1/4 inch and then I iron it. Then I fold over the opposite side of the fabric, making it overlap the first side just a bit. I used the original trim piece as a guide for mine, but as you can see, I made mine just a bit wider so that I can make sure I'm able to cover up those ugly edges of the fabric on my lampshade. Now that I have figured out how to make the trim pieces for the shades, I am going to use some Aleene's tacky glue to glue them to the shade. Before gluing the trim piece to the shade, I glued the folded edges of the trim piece down. Then I added more glue and I stuck the trim piece to the shade, making sure it completely covered the unfinished edge of the fabric on the panel. You can use hot glue for this step if you want, but I wanted to be able to have more time to move my pieces around to make sure I have them placed correctly, and hot glue doesn't really allow for that. Once I have all the unfinished edges of the fabric panels covered with the trim piece, I will cover the leftover bars on the frame with the trim piece too. This way it looks the same way the original lampshade looked. I wanted this project to be a completely no-sew project, but I needed to make a longer piece of bias tape to cover the bottom edge of the lampshade. If you have ever seen how bias tape is made, then you know that you sew multiple pieces of fabric together. I'm going to make my tape in a similar way, but I'm going to use tacky glue in the place of a sewing machine. I've cut 2 strips that are the entire length of my fabric and about 1.5 inches wide. I place one end of a fabric strip right side up, then lay the end of another strip wrong side up on top of the fabric strip at a right angle. Then I am going to fold over the top corner of the top piece at a 45-degree angle and iron it, making a crease. Now I'm going to take tacky glue and run a line of the glue along the crease. Then I place the strip back on top of the other one, face down at a 90-degree angle. Now I'm going to fold the top strip back, making the 2 strips into one long strip. And then I will let the fabric sit for a while so that the glue can dry. And when the glue is dry, I will cut off the excess fabric on the other side of my glue line. Now I'm going to fold this entire piece in half and iron it. Then I fold in the edges so that they meet in the middle and I iron them. Then I will fold the entire thing in half again and iron it one more time. Now I have my trim piece for the bottom and the top of my lampshade. Before I glue the trim pieces to the lampshade, I'm going to glue the folded pieces down. Now I'm going to start gluing the bottom trim on. I add 2 lines of glue so that I can fold the trim piece over the bottom of the lampshade, so that half of it will be facing out towards the front of the lampshade and the other half will be on the inside of the lampshade. I add a little glue, get that section stuck on, and then add more glue and stick that section down, working my way around the curved edges of the lampshade. Again, you could use hot glue to do this if you wanted, but I prefer to have more work time than the hot glue allows. When I get back to where I started, I will cut off the excess trim. Then I will fold over the unfinished end of the trim and glue the fold. And then I will glue that last little section of trim to the lampshade. I had enough of this trim left over from the bottom to do the top, but if I hadn't, I would have just made more trim the same way I did for the bottom. But since I had enough, I can just skip that step. So for the top of the lampshade, I'm just going to do the same thing that I did at the bottom. Fold the trim over the edge, gluing one side to the inside of the lampshade and the other to the outside of the lampshade. Then when I get to the end, I will cut off the excess, fold over the unfinished edge and glue it down, and then glue the rest of the trim to the lampshade. And once I have done that, this lampshade is complete. Stay tuned, because in my next video I will be showing you how I made over the lamp that this lampshade is sitting on. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope it was helpful to you. If you liked today's video, some easy and completely free ways to help support my channel and help it grow so that I can keep bringing you more ideas are to subscribe if you haven't already, give me a thumbs up, leave me a quick comment or even just an emoji, and share this video with anyone that you think might enjoy it. I truly appreciate your support, and I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!